What's up, fight fans and cannabis activists alike? We are back with another edition of My Marijuana Chronicles, and as always, brought to you by our good friends at O2 Vape. Make sure you check them out at o2vape.com and use promo code MyMMANews at checkout for 20% off your purchase. This edition of My Marijuana Chronicles, we have a very special guest, the first athlete in history to receive a therapeutic use exemption for medical cannabis. We got Elias, the Spartan Theodorou. He's here to talk about it all. My Marijuana Chronicles, let's get into it. We are back with another edition of My Marijuana Chronicles on My MMA News, and we are brought to you by O2 Vape. Check them out at o2vape.com. Use promo code MyMMANews for 20% off. I am being joined by the Spartan, Elias Theodorou. Man, it is a pleasure for you to be on. I told you before we got started, you were one of the ones that I wanted on originally when I first started this, being a medical cannabis patient myself. So first and foremost, it's an honor to have you on. I really appreciate it, Elias, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your kind words. It's an honor and both a pleasure myself.
All right, man. Well, let's get into it. I don't want to waste any of your time. First and foremost, congratulations, right? You're the trailblazer, the new standard of the medical cannabis patient, and not only in just the combat sports realm, but just sports period, right? The first TUE exemption, Elias. How's it feel, man? A long, long road.
Well, that's exactly it. A long road. Just like getting ready for a fight. There's a preparation that builds towards it. That's what I did in regards to my medical cannabis process. It involved many different aspects of just being a patient and talking with my doctors actually, in this case, because again, the process was not even necessarily the TUE that I got here, but also the TUE I applied for in the UFC through WADA. So all in all, it's been about a 4 or 5 year process at this point. But, anything worth doing takes a long time.
So start to finish, how did this whole process start? I mean, there was a long road, a long process to get done. Like you said, 4 years in the making. How did it start and finally get to fruition and you finally get your exemption?
Yeah, well, the UFC partnered with USADA around 2015, I believe it was.
Right.
It was during that process, cannabis was put on what's called the prohibited list. WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency, they are the governing body of all of the anti-doping agencies, and the UFC commissioned USADA, which is the United States Anti-Doping Agency, to do all the testing of the 600 plus athletes under the UFC roster. And as mentioned, cannabis is on what's called the prohibited list. A prohibited list ranges. There's a wide variety of things that you're not allowed to take. Some of them have a worse penalty than others. Cannabis, especially for quite some time, had one of the larger penalties. One, even in the commission before USADA, one example would be Nick Diaz, where he got I think it was a 5-year ban for cannabis originally, right? So again, those outdated mindsets have been with whether it's athletic organizations or USADA more specifically, those outdated mindsets and outdated regulations have put cannabis on par as to actual performance enhancers, and that's where cannabis finds itself. So when the UFC partnered with USADA, I then started to consult with my doctor, my family doctor, and then other doctors along the way to not only diagnose but also treat my medical condition, which is bilateral neuropathic pain, essentially nerve damage of my upper extremities. And with that more specifically, cannabis is the only thing that works for me.
Really?
Yes, more so not only in addition to the alternative medicines and the capacity that they don't work as well, but also the side effects. You got to remember, as a professional athlete, being forced to take pills, especially the kind of pills that have the side effects of indigestion, bloating, weight gain. Again, I have to cut weight, and the fact that a medicine that is being told that I need to take will actually have these side effects puts me at a competitive disadvantage because I'm not able to compete at a level playing field. Another athlete that can use, for instance, opioids would be able to use that and be fine, whereas me not being able to use my own medicine puts, again, me as a competitive disadvantage. But more so, again, kind of the broader term of this is medical equality. It's not even necessarily about cannabis. Other athletes could be on Percocets and it wouldn't be an issue. There's many different opioids that they could be on, but they wouldn't have a penalty for just being in the system. That's where my underlying case essentially comes from. Okay. The actual testing of cannabis is through a test that looks at your fat cells, and essentially based on the aspect of how much water, how much body fat you have, the actual lag time and the actual threshold differs. And my whole thing, well, my doctor and the professional counsels that helped me through this, was the aspect of the actual test itself. It's discriminating. And not only on the aspect of me as a Canadian being able to medicate as prescribed by my doctor, which is afforded to me by my Charter of Rights and Freedom in Canada under healthcare, and that's something that I focused on when I did the recent one in BC. With the USADA, the aspect was again the testing itself, and also the fact that the competitive disadvantage. Unfortunately, because of the fact that USADA is a United States company, and they get their funding from the United States government, they don't look at medicine, or they don't look at cannabis as a medicine because of its classification as a Schedule I drug, which makes it the same. It has the same property under the laws, under the eyes of the law, as heroin. But ironically, heroin can be used for opioids, and that's not an issue. Again, that draws to the war on drugs and the background on that aspect. Without even delving into that, that's what made my application with USADA an uphill battle, because they wanted me to do a very backwards thing. And this is not my opinion. This is my doctors, my multiple doctors that have helped me and consulted me through. In medicine, when you find something that works, you use it with your doctor's prescription and your doctor's guidance, right? So with this and the TUE that the United States Anti-Doping Agency wanted me to do was essentially, okay, even though that medicine works and your doctor says it works, I want you to exhaust every single medicine under the sun and then come back to it when we know that that medicine no longer works. No, those other medicines don't work. To the point where my family physician, again, would be looking at the list at what they kind of suggest, and he would laugh in frustration because of the fact that he would just say, we don't even do that anymore, because again, part of it has to do with the milligrams and how strong every single pill is, and the pill classification changes. So for instance, USADA wanted me to take antidepressants to numb my pain.
You got to be kidding.
So again, someone that isn't depressed was being told to take depressants to essentially numb your pain. And there was multiple aspects like that.
That makes no sense.
No, again, because they don't look at cannabis as a medicine. They look at it as a Schedule I narcotic, but at the same time, they look at heroin as the same scheduling, but that is using all types of opioids. Yeah. It's a backwards mindset that I'm determined to fight, and that's what I've been able to do in this most recent therapeutic use exemption application through the athletic body of British Columbia. The interesting thing of that, obviously, USADA has the implications of WADA and the World Anti-Doping Agency, but an athletic commission has a very specific implication as well beyond where it's given. So the UFC spearheaded essentially the rise of mixed martial arts and also its regulations and legality along the way to make it an actual legitimate sport. So they did that through piggybacking and also creating all the athletic commissions in North America, whether it piggybacking off of boxing or again, wholesale creating it. And there's different places that they actually do this around the world that don't have an athletic commission. Going back to North America, because they all essentially developed together for the most part with some having boxing, and again, some working with the regulation, or sorry, with the athletic commission through boxing. They have a cohesive partnership where, for instance, if we're going to look at prohibited substances, say I or another athlete was to be flagged with a natural steroid, right? Not the way they look at cannabis,
Right.
a natural steroid.
Yeah.
And I got suspended for 1 year in New York, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then I wanted to fight in a couple months in California.
Right.
In my licensing process, they would ask, have you been suspended? And I would have to be truthful. Again, you might be able to swing one by the goalie, but if you're truthful, you would tell them that you're currently suspended in New York, and that would probably, most likely, and most definitely, bar you from being licensed in that area, right? Because they have a cohesive cooperation, kind of agreement. Well, that same capacity is done so with a therapeutic use exemption. So now I am able to take this fight not only in BC, which I plan to fight in the near future, but also any other place that looks at medical cannabis looks at cannabis as a medicine. There are a lot of states and there are a lot of provinces. Well, nationally, cannabis obviously is a medicine, but in the United States, there are about 30 or 40, it's almost 40 states that look at cannabis as a medicine. But again, the broader project beyond this is to keep my fight not only inside the cage, but out for medical equality every single place and every single jurisdiction that I fight moving forward.
And can you detail any specific plans that you have? Because the ball's in your court at this point, and moving forward, what plans can you take to make it more, make the awareness more prevalent, make your mark, if that makes any sense?
Well, again, obviously, after my UFC release, I wanted to get back to the basics and get back to the drawing board, and that's what I was able to do and be successful in my most recent fight in Ontario, where I got a TKO win over a former UFC fighter. Fun fact to kind of bring up is the fact that Ontario doesn't have cannabis as a prohibited list, so they don't necessarily test for cannabis.
Right. Okay.
So I was essentially able, without fear of penalty, not because of a TUE, just because they weren't looking for that. It's kind of grandfathered in that way. They just never looked for cannabis. So point being, I essentially fought with the ability to medicate leading up to my fight without fear of penalty. So I was essentially competing at a level playing field. And in doing so, I came back victorious with a dominant TKO.
Dominant.
And again, able to now continue that fight and continue that momentum inside the cage and out. And one of the things that's, again, I would say is essentially as a free agent, I get to be an agent for advocacy for medical cannabis.
And I want to close it down. I know you're running short on time, but you've been going really hard with the hashtag Fight the Stigma, right? I want to talk about some of the stigmas that you feel so passionate about that you want to get off the board, that just erase this from your brain. We're so past this and this narrow mindset, that what are some of the stigmas that you, being a top level athlete, I mean, in your prime, you're just performing as best as you can. And not only that, but you have the therapeutic use exemption. So what stigma are you looking to fight?
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up, and thank you for noticing. And basically, with the concept of fight the stigma, it goes beyond athletics. The stigma itself are kind of the last aspects, specifically in Canada, let's say, where we can obviously build outwards. But with the legalization federally of cannabis nationwide, prohibition ended. All but 3 areas in many ways. And that's where the stigma comes from. Obviously athletics, and that's what I'm looking to fight. Also union workers and first responders. Those are 3 areas that still have a prohibited and prohibition of medical cannabis. Again, obviously there's a conversation to talk about the difference between recreational and medical. My argument is those three areas that have medical cannabis stigma is what I'm determined to fight. Again, not just for myself, but all other athletes and all other patients that want to medicate and can't.
And this will be one of my last ones. With CBD being so prevalent with recovery, and now obviously you having your therapeutic exemption for marijuana, do you think we're on the right step for athletes to get an alternative health source?
I definitely think so. Obviously, with CBD, that was the first step. The anti-inflammatory properties of CBD are very vital in just a better body, a better, lifestyle, like you said, but also it's preemptive. It also helps in regards to inflammation, and much of disease and injury and a whole wide list of ailments come from inflammation, first and foremost. Obviously, there's the aspect of using CBD, which uses the cannabinoids, but there's also, for instance, curcumin, which you can essentially use the curcuminoids. I always mess that word up. And then another interesting aspect, because kind of to better understand what cannabis does more specifically in the cannabinoid systems, we all have over 100 plus cannabinoid receptors in our body, and the term a runner's high actually is you activating your cannabinoids. Again, the whole holistic aspect of what you're able to do and harness cannabis is just more evident that it's a plant that is a medicine, and that's what I'm determined to fight and determined to share with others, and allow others to share their story as well. Hopefully my story and my progress with my therapeutic use exemption will now open the door for other athletes in British Columbia. But soon, as I fight elsewhere, we'll be able to open the door for athletes North America wide and hopefully worldwide.
All right, man. Well, you just said it all. I don't want to take any more of your time, man. Elias, I said it off record. I'm going to say it here. When I started my Marijuana Chronicles, you were one of the top of the list that I wanted to talk to. So this was a huge honor for me. One, being a fight fan and, watching your fights throughout the years. And two, being a medical cannabis patient myself, just seeing somebody go through the trials and tribulations, fighting the good fight, and just seeing it finally come to fruition for you. Congratulations, man. It's awesome to see, and I appreciate you taking the time, man.
Adam, it was my pleasure. Thank you for being an advocate yourself, and looking forward to catch up soon when I have more fight news and also what's it called, TUE and beyond news.
All right, there he goes, Elias Theodorou, the Spartan, and as some of you may know him, as you might see on Instagram, Weed Bay. We had him here, and another edition of My Marijuana Chronicles is in the books. Make sure you keep it locked to My MMA News for all your fight news needs. And Elias, again, I appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.